and welcome. This evening, our journey takes us far into antiquity, to the sun-drenched world of classical Greece, where white marble columns reached toward impossibly blue skies. Picture yourself materializing in the crowded marketplace of Athens. Around you, the sharp scent of cured olives mingles with human perspiration, while vendors cry out their wares in the distance. Brilliantly painted ceramics draw your attention, and fragments of intellectual discussion float from a nearby covered walkway. Citizens, draped in flowing chitons, debate matters of governance, commerce, and aesthetics. Your eyes sweep across magnificent temples and the imposing figures of political leaders. But gradually you notice something else, a hidden layer of society woven into this celebrated culture's very foundation, yet conspicuously absent from its most famous narratives. This evening, we'll carefully examine one of the more troubling, frequently heartbreaking aspects of that ancient world, the actual lived experience of a male concubine in classical Greece. This reality stands far removed from the romanticized depictions of scholars and soldiers. It's an element of everyday life that history's scrolls have often chosen to ignore. You could easily pass an elderly philosopher arguing intensely about moral principles, completely unaware of the quiet, observant young man standing beside him. By this evening's end, you'll comprehend that figure far more completely. Your contemporary values likely wouldn't survive even a single day here, particularly not in the position of someone so utterly defenseless. Before settling in, please consider liking this content and subscribing, though only if you genuinely appreciate what's presented here. For those listening, I'd love to know your location and current time. Now, lower the lights, perhaps switch on a fan for gentle ambient noise, and let's begin this journey together. You're observing an intricate system of social rankings, where citizenship represents everything, and liberty is a treasured commodity. The atmosphere vibrates with scholarly inquisitiveness, but also with implicit regulations and hierarchies of power. Understanding this historical context is essential. While magnificent philosophical concepts flourished here, so did customs that strike us as completely alien and deeply disturbing today. Consider, for example, a prosperous Athenian gentleman walking through the bazaar, accompanied by a younger man of remarkable beauty, not as someone of equal standing, but with an understated difference suggesting their unequal positions. This isn't the typical dynamic between master and enslaved person, nor is it an openly recognized partnership. It occupies a strange, poorly defined territory. An easily overlooked detail is how these arrangements often functioned as status indicators, discrete demonstrations of prosperity and influence for the benefactor, comparable to possessing a valuable artwork or a well-bred stallion. Scholars continue debating whether the nuanced power dynamics in these relationships ever achieved genuine reciprocity, or whether the appearance of guidance simply concealed a more profound form of abuse. You're starting to perceive that classical Greece's celebrated principles sometimes concealed a more troubling, complicated underbelly. While you navigate the twisting streets, the sounds of daily existence surround you, the steady ringing of a metalworker's hammer, distant goat calls, women's conversations at the communal water source. Picture the dissonance between the grand intellectual debates you overhear and the quiet, nearly invisible hardships developing behind household walls. You catch a brief glimpse of a young man, simply dressed, carrying a basket toward a large, intimidating estate. His gaze seems to contain an untold story, a restrained exhaustion that contradicts his youth. This doesn't match the idealized vision of classical Greece depicted on pottery or in theatrical performances. This is an environment where social positions are inflexibly determined, and chances are limited for those beyond the fortunate minority. The notion of liberty here isn't universal. It's a jealously protected advantage, typically determined by inheritance, prosperity, or particular legal classifications. Think about the concepts of affection and longing in this ancient context. While poetry and mythology praised passionate love affairs, the truth for many proved far more transactional. You wonder how different their comprehension of relationships was, lacking our contemporary focus on reciprocal agreement and emotional parity. The very atmosphere seems charged with implicit expectations and concealed transactions. It's a civilization constructed on a precarious equilibrium of reputation, status, and stringent social regulations. You'll quickly learn that what was deemed appropriate behind locked doors could differ dramatically from what was publicly acknowledged in the open forum. The sun descends lower, throwing elongated shadows across ancient stonework, and you sense the burden of this historical truth becoming heavier. The gentle sound of evening cicadas offers a soothing background, even as the seriousness of the subject starts revealing itself. You also detect the sheer concentration of activity. Every narrow passage seems alive with movement. Children pursue one another, their joy bouncing off stone surfaces. Merchants advertise their merchandise, their voices forming a rhythmic drone. The aromas are diverse. Ripe figs, pungent olives, the earthy fragrance of just baked bread. Even within this colorful scene, your attention gravitates toward the more understated indicators of rank and authority. How certain individuals move with an atmosphere of uncontested dominance. Their posture erect, their stare direct, contrasting starkly with those who carry themselves more deferentially. Their vision lowered. You watch the relaxed fellowship among clusters of men who seem to be equals, their conversations energetic and their movements unrestricted. Then your attention settles on another youthful figure, standing silently near a shop's entrance, his bearing mirroring a comparable unease. These are the people who exist at the margins, not entirely integrated into the acknowledged social structure, yet intrinsically connected to it. The city pulses with vitality, but for some, that pulse is a perpetual reminder of their station, a quiet murmur of their restricted existence. As morning light begins its gradual climb over the ancient metropolis, bathing marble in shades of rose and amber, your experience truly commences. You're not simply watching anymore. You're experiencing through history's perspective what it meant to be a male concubine in this society. This position, you rapidly understand, wasn't about reciprocal devotion or an acknowledged union in the way we comprehend relationships currently. Rather, it was profoundly embedded in the social stratification of classical Greece, a civilization fixated on status, citizenship, and freedom. Understanding this historical context is crucial. While citizens possessed certain degrees of self-governance, numerous others were less privileged. Enslaved people, naturally, inhabited the bottom tier, regarded as property instead of persons. But male concubines occupied a hazy, frequently paradoxical space, somewhere above absolute bondage, yet far, far beneath the respected status of a free man. An intriguing detail about this period is that, while the concept of pederasty existed, a mentorship arrangement between an older man, the Erastes, and a younger boy, the Eromenos, that occasionally included sexual intimacy. It was frequently romanticized in philosophical writings as a vehicle for education and character formation. However, the actuality of male concubinage, as you're experiencing it, seldom approached that elevated ideal. These weren't characteristically relationships of intellectual peers or honored mentorship. Instead, concubines were chiefly maintained for sexual satisfaction, and as representations of their patron's prosperity and authority. Scholars continue debating whether any authentic attachment or sincere care could develop within such an inherently imbalanced power arrangement, or if the concubine's emotional welfare was simply an afterthought. You might experience a moment of skepticism, observing the contradiction. You find yourself questioning the legal position of such individuals. Were they enslaved? Were they free? The response is maddeningly ambiguous and relied heavily on particular circumstances. Most male concubines were either slaves explicitly obtained for this function or freeborn but destitute young men sold or compelled into the position due to desperate financial situations. For an enslaved concubine, your physical form and your hours belonged completely to your possessor. You possessed no rights, no legal recourse, and no possibility of legal safeguarding. For a freeborn male forced into concubinage, the circumstances were marginally different, perhaps permitting a theoretical, though infrequently actionable claim to liberty. However, the overwhelming economic reliance and social disgrace meant that even a freeborn concubine lived an existence of deep vulnerability. Picture for a moment the mental burden. You are an object appreciated for your youth and attractiveness, perhaps for your capacity to entertain, but rarely for your intellect or your essence. Your days are determined by the impulses of your patron. You could be called at any time, day or night, to fulfill his requirements. This might involve serving him meals and beverages, offering musical diversion, or simply being available for his sexual pleasure. There's a persistent pressure to anticipate his wishes, to sustain a composed and pleasant manner, regardless of your internal chaos. You master reading the subtle changes in his temperament, the minor tightening of his jaw, the gleam in his gaze, all indicators of what he expects from you next. Your continuation, in a genuine sense, relies on your capacity to remain flexible and submissive. The atmosphere might be saturated with the scent of roasted meat and excellent wine, but for you it's merely another evening of performance and compliance. There's a quiet apprehension that saturates your existence, a persistent consciousness of your unstable position. You navigate a precarious line, needing to satisfy your patron to guarantee your ongoing, albeit wretched existence, while simultaneously tolerating the indignities that accompany the role. The soft evening wind might bring momentary relief from the heat, but it does little to ease the internal coldness of your reality. You become skilled in the practice of quiet observation. You notice the subtle exchanges between family members, the unspoken directives between master and enslaved person, the casual presumptions of superiority from citizens. You learn to interpret the silences, the glances, the slight posture changes that signal approval or disapproval. This skill emerges not from curiosity, but from necessity. Your very welfare depends on your ability to accurately assess the moods of those surrounding you, particularly your patron. You might spend hours in a single room, a silent witness to debates on democracy or discussions about military strategies, absorbing fragments of knowledge you aren't meant to possess. The sounds of distant laughter from the street, perhaps from free men enjoying a walk, emphasize the boundary of your existence. You are inside, perpetually watching, perpetually serving, a silent component of the luxurious machinery, yet fundamentally disconnected from the free will and agency that drives it. The shadows extend, bringing with them a sense of quiet resignation, a familiar companion in your constrained life. The morning sun now fully brightens the city, emphasizing the harsh contrasts within its seemingly perfect exterior. You've adjusted to the rhythm of this peculiar existence, and one thing becomes glaringly obvious. Your status, or more accurately your absence of it, defines every waking instant. The phrase male concubine might sound exotic to contemporary ears, but in classical Greece, for many, it simply meant catamite, a term frequently applied to young boys and men who functioned as passive sexual partners. These individuals were regularly obtained through various methods. Some were war prisoners, others were children purchased by impoverished families, and a few, though likely uncommon for those truly enslaved, might have been free-born individuals driven by poverty. This complex origin story for such individuals means that their starting position in this unenviable role could differ, yet the ultimate outcome was remarkably similar in its limitations and hardships. An interesting detail about the term catamite is its linguistic origin, deriving from the Latin catamitus, which itself was a romanization of the Greek name Ganymede. Remember Ganymede from the myths? The beautiful Trojan prince seized by Zeus to be his cupbearer on Mount Olympus. While the myth might sound romantic, frequently depicting an almost idyllic servitude, the reality for human catamites was anything but divine. They were far from revered. Scholars continue debating whether the use of such a mythical, almost divine association served to soften the harsh reality of their exploitation, or simply highlighted the absolute power dynamic at play, implying a natural order to their submission. You can almost sense the uncomfortable irony of it all, a beautiful name concealing a painful truth. Your early existence, if you were to embody this role, would likely have been characterized by devastating loss and an abrupt, violent transformation. Perhaps you remember the comfort of a modest dwelling, the sound of siblings' laughter, or the reassuring scent of your mother's meals. All of that has vanished now, supplanted by the sterile magnificence, or occasionally the bare functionality, of your patron's estate. You were, in reality, selected, not chosen for your intelligence or your courage, but for your youth, your physical appearance, and your assumed malleability. This selection was rarely, if ever, consensual. It was a commercial exchange, a capture, or a desperate capitulation. Picture the devastating weight of that comprehension. Your entire being, your future, controlled by someone else's appetites, with no voice in the matter, no protest, and no way out. You're carefully instructed in particular behaviors that define your new reality. How to serve with silent effectiveness. How to please without obvious emotional displays. How to remain quiet and unnoticeable when not explicitly summoned. Your movements become economical, almost graceful in their learned deference. Your facial expressions muted. A deliberate disguise. You learn to foresee needs before they're even articulated, a skill born of persistent observation and the urgent necessity to avoid dissatisfaction. There's a quiet desperation that permeates your learned obedience, an unspoken appeal for peaceful existence within your boundaries. The lavish frescoes on the walls depicting gods and champions in victories and romantic encounters seem to ridicule your situation. Their idealized narratives contrast sharply with your diminished reality. They narrate tales of magnificent accomplishments and great liberties, while your own story is one of quiet subjugation, an existence lived entirely on another's conditions. You might even observe other household slaves, perhaps performing more strenuous duties like grinding grain or hauling water, and question if their lot, despite its physical severity, somehow offers more dignity than your own. At least their labor, however demanding, has a tangible, recognized function in the household's operation beyond simply existing for another's gratification. Their daily toil, while exhausting, might feel less personally invasive. The gentle rustling of olive branches outside the window offers a fleeting moment of tranquility, quickly eclipsed by the ever-present awareness of your situation, a constant hum of powerlessness beneath the surface of daily existence. As you proceed through your silent existence within the maze-like passages of your patron's residence, you become acutely conscious of the intricate web of authority that defines your every interaction. Your patron, typically an older aristocratic man, holds complete dominion over your life. He is your Aristos, the older dominant partner in this arrangement, and you are his Eromenos, the younger passive one. It was generally understood that these relationships, while often sexual, were framed in philosophical discourse as opportunities for the older man to transmit wisdom and knowledge to the younger. However, the reality for a male concubine often fell far short of this idealized model. Instead of intellectual cultivation, your purpose was primarily one of service and gratification. An interesting detail is that, while Greek society openly acknowledged many forms of same-sex relationships, particularly the pedagogical ones, those involving concubines were often spoken of in hushed tones or veiled in euphemisms. This was unlike the more celebrated, often public mentor-mentee pairings between free citizens, which were seen as contributing to the civic good. This subtle distinction highlights the underlying social discomfort with the concubine status, a kind of collective turning away from its less savory aspects. Historians still argue whether the philosophical justifications for pederasty were genuinely believed by all, or if they sometimes served as a convenient intellectual veneer for more exploitative practices, allowing the elite to rationalize their desires. You might feel a flicker of skepticism observing this hypocrisy from your silent vantage point. Your days are structured around your patron's impulses. You might be called at any time, day or night, to fulfill his requirements, which could range from the ordinary to the deeply intimate. This could involve serving him meals and beverages, offering musical entertainment, or simply being available for his sexual pleasure. There's a constant, pervasive pressure to anticipate his desires, to maintain a calm and agreeable demeanor regardless of your internal turmoil. You learn to read the subtle shifts in his mood, the slight tightening of his jaw, the almost imperceptible glint in his eye, the change in the tone of his voice. All these are crucial clues to what he expects of you next, and your immediate compliance is paramount. Your survival, in a very real sense, depends on your ability to remain pliable and obedient, a constant performance of submission. Picture for a moment the emotional suppression required for this existence. You cannot express fear, anger, or sadness, at least not openly. Any uncalculated display of genuine emotion might be perceived as defiance, leading to swift and unpleasant consequences. Your true self, your hopes, your dreams, your cherished memories of a life before this servitude must be carefully tucked away, hidden deep within. They are a secret garden no one else can visit. The luxurious fabrics around you, the rich scents of incense and perfume that fill the villa are merely a gilded cage. You might be given fine clothing, perhaps even some small trinkets, but these are tokens of your servitude, not symbols of your freedom. They are a display for your patron's friends, a testament to his wealth, not a comfort for your soul. You are, in essence, a living ornament, a beautiful object, a testament to his power and his desires. The distant sounds of a flute, played by some free citizen in a nearby courtyard, remind you of a different kind of life, one filled with unburdened melody and spontaneous joy, a stark contrast to the silent symphony of your own constrained existence. The very air around you feels heavy with unspoken expectations, a constant pressure that never truly lifts. The hours within your patron's home stretch out, filled with a quiet routine dictated by his needs. you begin to understand that while a surface level of mentorship might be paid lip service by your patron, the practical application of it is often absent. You'll find that true educational guidance encompassing intellectual and moral development was typically reserved for young freeborn males, often within the context of the gymnasium or philosophical schools. Your own education, if any, would be limited to practical skills or rudimentary literacy, just enough to fulfill your duties, but certainly not to elevate your social standing or grant you any form of independent thought. You are a tool, and tools need only enough knowledge to perform their function. An interesting detail is that sometimes concubines were expected to possess certain artistic talents, like playing a musical instrument, singing, or reciting poetry. Imagine mastering the lyre, not for the pure joy of music or for self-expression, but purely as another means to entertain your patron and his guests, to become another pleasing sound in the background of their lavish symposia. Your performances are not applauded for your artistry, but for how well they serve to enhance the atmosphere for the free men present. Historians still argue whether these acquired skills offered any real personal enrichment or merely served to enhance the concubine's market value or appeal to their patron, making them a more desirable possession. You might feel a dull ache in your fingers from practicing, not from passion, but from the relentless grip of obligation. Your daily routine often involves a strange mix of idleness and sudden demands. You might spend long stretches waiting, an invisible presence in the household, observing the comings and goings of slaves, family members, and visitors. You become a master of patience, existing in a state of suspended animation. Then, without warning, you're called upon. Perhaps your patron desires a massage, or wants you to recline beside him while he reads aloud, or expects you to join him in his private chambers. There is no predictability, no personal schedule you can truly call your own. Your body and your time are not yours. They are extensions of your patron's will, subject to his instantaneous desires, like a puppet responding to its master's unseen strings. You eat what you are given, sleep where you are told, and wear what is provided. Even the simplest pleasures, like a moment of quiet reflection in a shaded courtyard or a brief walk in the garden, are contingent on your patron's mood and his explicit permission. The grand architecture around you, the intricate mosaics underfoot, the sunlight filtering through the peristyle columns, all serve as a beautiful but constant reminder of your confinement. You are part of the scenery, a living, breathing decoration in this elaborate domestic theater. The sounds of distant laughter from the street, perhaps from free children playing, might drift in, a poignant reminder of the simple, unburdened freedom you've lost. You learn to make your face a mask, your movements precise and silent, becoming an expert in disappearing into the shadows, emerging only when commanded. It's a quiet, relentless erasure of your own self, a slow fading into the background of another's life. The sun continues its slow arc across the Athenian sky, and as the day wears on, you become acutely aware of the pervasive social stigma that clings to your very existence. While the practice of male concubinage was in some ways an open secret among the elite, it was never a path to social honor or public acclaim. Quite the opposite. You'd feel the subtle yet unmistakable weight of disapproval from those considered respectable members of society. It's a key historical point that even in a society where same-sex relationships were not inherently taboo, the passive role in such a relationship, for a free man, was often seen as effeminate, and thus a profound mark of shame. This societal condemnation, more than any legal code, acted as an invisible cage, preventing any hope of genuine integration or respect. An interesting detail you might observe is how, even within the patron's household, the other, more traditionally enslaved individuals might view you with a mixture of pity and a nuanced form of contempt. They, at least, perform recognized labor, whether in the fields, the workshops, or the kitchens. Their work, though arduous, had a defined purpose within the household economy. Your work, however, is intimate and often humiliating, reducing you to an object of pleasure, a personal indulgence that carries less societal validation. Historians still argue whether the deep-seated societal aversion to the passive male role contributed more to the concubines' misery than the actual legal limitations they faced, creating an internal and external landscape of disdain. You can feel the quiet judgment in every averted gaze, every dismissive glance, a constant whisper of your diminished standing. You are acutely aware that your relationship with your patron is not, and can never be, publicly acknowledged in any honorable way. You wouldn't be introduced as a partner in a civic setting, nor would your presence ever be celebrated in a formal gathering of free citizens. Instead, you exist in the shadows, a hidden, often unspoken element of your patron's private life. If he entertains, you might be present to serve, to provide background entertainment, but never to sit as an equal or engage in intellectual discourse. You are a commodity, an extension of his private desires, rather than a person with inherent worth or recognized social identity. This distinction is paramount, always placing you outside the circle of valued individuals. Imagine the constant self-awareness of this low status. Every time you step outside the confines of the house, perhaps on an errand for your patron, you move with a subtle hunch, a guardedness in your eyes, a conscious effort to blend into the background. You learn to make yourself small, invisible to the casual passerby, lest their recognition bring further shame not only to you, but potentially to your patron. If he were to be associated too openly with such a stigmatized figure, the beautiful Greek sculptures you might glimpse in public spaces, celebrating the idealized male form in athletic and heroic poses, serve as a cruel contrast to your own diminished reality. You are not a warrior, not a philosopher, not a citizen. You are simply his. This constant sense of being less than is an insidious poison, slowly eroding any sense of self-worth you might once have possessed, leaving behind a hollow echo of your former self. The bustling sounds of the city, once a source of wonder, now seem to amplify your isolation, a loud reminder of the vibrant life from which you are fundamentally excluded. As your days unfold, the lack of any formal legal status becomes a suffocating reality. You are effectively without rights in a society that prides itself on its laws and civic structures. It's a cruel twist of fate that while ancient Greek law could be incredibly detailed and sophisticated, offering protections to citizens and even to a limited extent to some categories of slaves with specific roles, it offered almost none for a male concubine. If your patron chose to mistreat you, or even to inflict severe harm, you had virtually no recourse, no avenue for justice, and no hope of legal redress. Your existence was, in a legal sense, a blank page. An interesting detail you might discover is that while harming a free person could carry severe penalties, sometimes even death in certain city-states, the same rules simply did not apply to you. Your body was not legally considered inviolable in the same way. You were not seen as a person in the legal sense that mattered for such protections, but rather as property, or at best, an appendage of your patron. Historians still argue whether this legal void was an oversight, a deliberate omission designed to maintain the absolute power of the patron and to prevent any challenge to the social order, or a simple reflection of a society that couldn't quite categorize you. You feel the cold dread of this reality, a constant awareness that your physical well-being is entirely at the mercy of another's whim. There's no one to appeal to, no magistrate to petition, no family to offer protection, for you are likely cut off from your own. Picture a scenario where your patron, perhaps in a fit of pique or drunken rage during a symposium, strikes you. You might instinctively flinch, but you know better than to resist or even cry out too loudly. A bruised eye, a cut lip, or a broken tooth is simply something you endure, perhaps hiding it as best you can from others in the household, lest it displease your patron further. There would be no consequences for your patron, no legal repercussions, no public outcry. Your body, in essence, is not your own. It is an extension of his will, a plaything to be used and discarded as he sees fit. This absolute lack of legal recourse means you live in a constant state of apprehension, a perpetual fear of the unexpected. Every interaction with your patron, no matter how benign, carries an unspoken threat, a chilling reminder of his power and your utter helplessness. Even the smallest gestures of kindness from your patron, if they occur, serve only to highlight your dependence. A new tunic, a slightly larger portion of food during a meal, a moment of seemingly unguarded conversation. These aren't gestures of equality or genuine affection, but rather subtle reminders of who holds the strings. You are acutely aware that these meager comforts can be withdrawn at any moment, leaving you with absolutely nothing. Your perceived good fortune is merely a reflection of his momentary mood or a calculation of his own convenience. The world outside the patron's villa might seem vibrant and alive with the sounds of commerce and the roar of public debate, but for you, those sounds are just distant echoes of a freedom you do not possess, a life lived by rules that do not apply to you. The soft glow of oil lamps begins to cast long, dancing shadows on the walls of your small quarters, and you find yourself wishing for the quiet oblivion of sleep, a brief escape from the day's anxieties and the ever-present threat of your vulnerable reality. As your days in this ancient Greek household unfold, the stark reality of your economic dependence becomes an undeniable heavy burden. You possess nothing of your own, no land to cultivate, no trade to practice, no specialized skills that could genuinely earn you an independent living outside of your patron's household. Your very sustenance, your clothing, your shelter, all come directly from his generosity, or rather, his calculation of your utility. It's a foundational aspect of this historical period that economic autonomy was intrinsically linked to social freedom. Without the means to support yourself, you were inevitably beholden to another, utterly reliant on their continued provision. This dependency created a cage, invisible yet unbreakable, where your survival was dictated by a single will. An interesting detail you might reflect on is how this reliance creates a peculiar kind of psychological trap, an invisible bond even stronger than physical chains. Even if your patron is not overtly cruel, the constant awareness that your well-being hinges entirely on his whim is debilitating. You are like a plant that can only grow with the precise amount of water and sunlight provided by its gardener. Too little and you wither. Too much and you drown in obligation. Historians still argue whether the economic leverage held by patrons was a more effective tool of control than outright physical coercion, subtly crushing the spirit without leaving visible marks, creating a deeper, more insidious form of servitude. You feel this silent, insidious pressure every moment, a constant gnawing at your sense of self-worth. Picture the absolute lack of agency that defines your existence. If you dreamed of a different life, of learning a craft, or traveling to another city to seek your fortune, those dreams would quickly evaporate under the crushing weight of your circumstances. You cannot simply walk away. Where would you go? Who would take you in? Without financial means, without connections, without a recognized place in society, you would quickly face starvation, exposure, or be forced into an even more desperate and dangerous form of servitude, perhaps in a brothel or as a common laborer with no protections whatsoever. This complete reliance binds you to your patron as surely as any physical chain. You are an asset, a possession that requires upkeep, a means to an end, but a possession nonetheless, lacking self-ownership. Even the food you eat, though it might be plentiful and of good quality if your patron is wealthy and desires to keep his property well maintained, comes with a silent price. Each morsel is a constant, humbling reminder of your dependency, a visible symbol of your lack of independence. The quiet clatter of dishes from the kitchen, the distant hum of daily life in the household, all serve to underscore your unique and isolated position. Within it, you are cared for. Yes, your basic needs are met, but not out of love or genuine respect, but out of ownership and utility. This economic tether ensures that any fleeting thoughts of rebellion or escape remain just that, fleeting whispers in your mind, quickly extinguished by the cold, undeniable logic of survival. The evening shadows lengthen, wrapping the villa in a comforting dimness, but for you, it merely signals another night of quiet submission, another day in which your existence is not truly your own. As you continue to exist within this unspoken framework, you begin to grasp the profound absence of any institutional support for your role. Unlike recognized marriages, which were formalized by rituals and protected by law, or even the established, albeit harsh, legal frameworks surrounding various categories of slavery, male concubinage simply existed outside any formal protective structures. There were no temples where you could seek sanctuary for a grievance, no civic bodies to appeal to for justice, and no defined legal precedents that offered you even a sliver of recourse if you were wronged. This informal nature meant you were utterly exposed. An interesting detail is that while Greek society had elaborate rituals and laws for almost every conceivable aspect of life, from religious ceremonies and athletic contests to property disputes and commercial contracts, your specific situation was a silent exception. It was as if your very existence in that role was a discrete arrangement, a private matter that the broader society chose not to formalize or regulate, thereby absolving itself of any responsibility towards you. Historians still argue whether this lack of formal structure made the concubines' position even more vulnerable, leaving them entirely at the mercy of individual patrons without any societal safety net to fall back on. You sense this profound isolation, a chilling understanding that no one, no institution, would intervene on your behalf. Picture the crushing feeling of being utterly alone. If your patron proved to be cruel, abusive, or simply decided to discard you, there was no official body to turn to for help. You couldn't seek medical attention for injuries without your patron's permission, nor could you appeal for food or shelter if cast out onto the streets. You were adrift, entirely dependent on the personal character of one man, a single individual's benevolence or caprice. This complete lack of a support system meant that any mistreatment, any abuse, any humiliation was endured in silence, behind closed doors, a private agony. Your suffering was largely invisible to the world outside the villa, a secret shame. Even the whisper of hope for escape or a better life would be quickly stifled by this reality. Without a network of support, without legal standing, without economic means to sustain yourself, any attempt at flight would lead only to further destitution and danger, potentially forcing you into even more degrading circumstances. You are trapped not just by the physical walls of the villa, but by the impenetrable social and legal barriers that surround you. An inescapable prison of circumstance. The soft glow of the afternoon sun filtering through the courtyard trees highlights dust motes dancing in the air, a beautiful but fleeting reminder of the freedom of movement that is denied to you. This constant vulnerability, the knowledge that you are utterly exposed and without recourse, becomes a deep, unsettling, and pervasive part of your daily experience, a silent weight on your soul. The concept of marriage in ancient Greece, with its formal rituals, public pronouncements, and deeply embedded social recognition, stands in stark contrast to your own utterly unrecognized status. It's a crucial historical distinction that your position as a male concubine was emphatically not a substitute for marriage. While some relationships between an Erastes and Eromenos might have offered a form of companionship, particularly in philosophical circles, your specific role as a concubine never afforded you the social standing, the legal protections, the lineage recognition, or the inheritance rights that came with being a spouse. Your relationship, no matter how long-standing or outwardly stable, was inherently private and unprotected in the eyes of the law and broader society. An interesting detail here is that even the most celebrated philosophical discussions about relationships, including those between men, almost always implicitly or explicitly centered on the context of free citizens and their lineage. These dialogues were often concerned with the proper management of the oikos, the household, and the continuation of the family line, which were paramount in Greek society. Your presence as a concubine existed entirely outside this formal framework. Historians still argue whether the lack of any official recognition for male concubinage was a way to maintain the rigid social hierarchy, ensuring that such relationships, even if common in practice, did not blur the sacred lines of legitimate family structures, citizenship, and property inheritance. You feel the weight of this invisible barrier separating you from any true sense of belonging, permanence, or a recognized future. Picture watching a wedding procession from the shadows, perhaps for your patron's daughter or a prominent neighbor's son. You see the bride, veiled and adorned, led through the streets, accompanied by joyous song and celebratory cheers. You witness the public feast, the offering of sacrifices, the symbolic joining of two families and their properties. All of it unfolds as a grand spectacle of legitimate social connection and the continuation of the polis. For you, it's a poignant, almost heartbreaking reminder of what you are denied. You can never stand in that position of honor, never have your union acknowledged by the community, never participate in the rituals that confer legitimacy. You can never raise children who would bear your name and inherit your social standing. For even if you fathered children, they would not be recognized as yours in a legal sense, belonging instead to their mother's household or patron. Your relationships are, by their very nature, transient and ultimately disposable in the eyes of society. This absence of formal recognition extends beyond mere ceremony. It has profoundly practical and often devastating consequences. It means that if your patron were to die, you would likely be left with nothing. No claim to his estate, no legal provisions for your future, no family network to support you. You would be cast adrift, dependent entirely on the good graces of his heirs, if any, or forced to find another patron if you could, thereby perpetuating your cycle of vulnerability. This inherent instability, this constant threat of being rendered destitute and without purpose, is a constant, gnawing anxiety that underpins your daily life. The sounds of everyday life, the distant hum of conversation, the ringing of hammers from artisans at work, all seem to underscore your profound isolation, your lack of roots in this complex social soil. The world continues around you, vibrant and full of intricate connections, but you remain an outsider, bound by unseen chains that prevent you from ever truly integrating. As you continue to exist within this unspoken framework, you begin to grasp the profound disconnect between public perception of relationships and the quiet, often harsh reality of your own. Ancient Greek society, particularly among the elite, held a complex and often contradictory view of desire and partnership. While philosophical ideals might extol virtues and intellectual bonds in some male relationships, your situation as a concubine was rarely viewed through such a gilded lens. It's a significant historical observation that the very existence of male concubines often went unmentioned in formal texts, creating a silent consensus around a practice that was both common and simultaneously disdained. This historical silence speaks volumes, suggesting a societal discomfort that preferred not to scrutinize certain truths too closely, leaving individuals like you in a kind of limbo of non-recognition. You are there, undeniably present, yet your presence carries a weight of unspoken judgment. An interesting detail you might notice is the subtle difference in how male concubines were perceived compared to female concubines. While both lacked the full rights of a spouse, female concubinage could sometimes carry a degree of practical acceptance, occasionally even bearing children who might be legitimized, thus securing a future, albeit one still without full spousal rights. For male concubines, however, the social stigma was often more pronounced, deeply rooted in notions of masculinity and the perception of the passive role as effeminate and thus a mark of shame for free men. Historians still argue whether this difference in societal acceptance stemmed more from anxieties about male social roles, the preservation of lineage, or simply reflected different power dynamics inherent in each form of concubinage. You can feel the weight of this unspoken judgment even when no words are uttered, a palpable sense of being an outsider looking in on a world that doesn't quite acknowledge your full humanity. Picture being present at a symposium, an evening gathering where men would recline, drink wine, and engage in philosophical debate or lighthearted conversation. You might be there to serve, to pour wine, to attend to the needs of your patron and his guests. The discourse around you might touch on concepts of beauty, love, and the ideal forms of relationships, perhaps even abstract discussions of eros. Yet you are acutely aware that your own relationship, your very presence, exists in a shadow world that would never be openly celebrated or even truly acknowledged in such lofty discussions. You are a living testament to a reality they prefer not to scrutinize too closely, a silent figure in the background of their intellectual and social theater. The clinking of Kylix drinking cups, the aroma of rich foods, the vibrant discussions about civic duty and poetic verse, all these sensory details of a lively gathering only serve to emphasize your isolated position, a figure at the periphery, always present, but never truly part of the grand tapestry of free society. This gap between public ideal and private reality creates a peculiar kind of psychological burden. You learn to perform, to present a facade that matches the unspoken expectations of your role. You are a quiet observer, listening to conversations about honor and freedom, knowing full well that these concepts do not apply to you in any meaningful way. You internalize the message that your worth is tied to your utility, not to your inherent personhood. The very air seems to hum with this unspoken understanding. The soft glow of the oil lamps casts long, dancing shadows, blurring the lines between what is seen and what is truly known, between the celebrated facade and the hidden, often painful truth of lives like yours. The quiet hum of the night, usually a source of comfort, seems to echo your internal solitude. As the sun crests the midday sky, casting harsh shadows, you find yourself increasingly pressed into the role of entertainment within your patron's lavish symposia. These gatherings, a cornerstone of ancient Greek aristocratic life, were far more than mere dinner parties. They were intellectual salons, drinking bouts, and social showcases all rolled into one, designed to display the patron's wealth, taste, and intellectual prowess. Your presence as a concubine was often integral to the atmosphere, a living ornament alongside the music, wine, and witty conversation, meant to enhance the experience for the free male guests. It's a fundamental aspect of historical understanding that the entertainment provided at these events was diverse, ranging from philosophical discourse and poetry recitation to more base forms of amusement and sexual gratification. An interesting detail you might observe is how the lines between passive presence and active performance blur for you, making your role ambiguous and often taxing. You might be expected to recline quietly, listening intently to the debates, yet also ready at a moment's notice to fetch more wine, adjust cushions, or engage in private, often sexual conversations with guests if your patron so dictates. Sometimes you might even be called upon to play the lyre, sing a song, or recite poetry, your talents becoming another facet of the evening's carefully orchestrated entertainment. Historians still argue whether this expectation to perform, even artistically, contributed to a perceived shred of dignity, allowing for some self-expression, or if it merely deepened the exploitation by making your person and talents entirely transactional, reducing them to mere services for hire. You feel the constant pressure to be on, to be agreeable, charming, and ever ready to please, even when your soul aches with exhaustion or revulsion. Picture the scene. The room is filled with the boisterous laughter of wealthy, educated men, their voices rising and falling, with the ebb and flow of discussion. The air is thick with the scent of roasted meat, fine wine, and perfumed oils, creating an intoxicating sensory experience for the attendees. Discussions range from the latest political intrigues and naval battles to abstract philosophical concepts about the nature of the cosmos and the ideal forms of government. You are there, physically present, perhaps even physically close to your patron, yet you are fundamentally an outsider to their world of intellect, power, and unburdened freedom. Your primary role is to enhance their pleasure and comfort, not to participate in their profound discourse as an equal. You might offer a witty remark or a knowing glance, if you dare, but always with the underlying understanding that your contribution is for their amusement, a fleeting spark of entertainment, not for intellectual engagement or genuine contribution to the conversation. This constant exposure to a world of privilege and freedom that is utterly denied to you creates a profound sense of irony and detachment. You serve the finest wines in exquisitely crafted vessels, listen to the most profound thoughts articulated by sharp minds, and witness the unbridled camaraderie of free men, all while knowing you are merely a backdrop, a beautiful fixture in their elaborate stage production. The clinking of the drinking cups, the echoes of their laughter, the very warmth of the fire in the hearth, all these sensory details of a lively gathering only serve to amplify your quiet solitude and your inherent exclusion. You are a part of the spectacle, yet simultaneously removed from its true essence, forever on the outside looking in. A silent, beautiful prop in their grand, boisterous drama. Your own thoughts and feelings existing in a private, unspoken universe beyond the philosophical ideals of pederasty. You confront the harsh reality of how male concubines were perceived in terms of their physical appearance and expected dress. Unlike the free eromenos, who might be admired for their athletic build or natural beauty, your aesthetic was carefully cultivated and controlled by your patron. It's a crucial historical point that your body was not entirely your own, but a part of your patron's display of wealth and taste, and therefore its presentation was rigorously managed. This management extended to every detail, from the cut of your hair to the scent on your skin, transforming you into a curated object rather than a self-determining individual. An interesting detail here is that while free Greek men typically wore simple, practical tunics and cloaks, often favoring a more rugged or austere natural appearance that emphasized their citizenship and participation in military life, your attire might be markedly different. You might be dressed in softer, more brightly colored fabrics, perhaps with subtle adornments, or perfumes that would be considered effeminate or ostentatious for a citizen. This deliberate difference in dress served multiple purposes. It could enhance your appeal to your patron and his guests, mark you as a luxury item, and perhaps most importantly, visibly differentiate you from free men, reinforcing your lower, non-citizen status. Historians still argue whether this distinctive dress was primarily for aesthetic pleasure or for social demarcation. You feel the subtle discomfort of being adorned, knowing that each piece of fabric, each scent, is not for your comfort or self-expression, but for the pleasure and projection of your patron's identity and power. Picture standing silently in a room, perhaps at a symposium, dressed in a light, finely woven chiton that drapes gracefully, subtly accentuating your form. Your hair might be styled in longer locks, perhaps even perfumed and intricately arranged in a way that is distinctly different from the short, practical cuts favored by the free men around you. You are a living aesthetic, a part of the visual and sensory experience for your patron and his guests. You are acutely aware of their gazes, their quiet appraisals, the way their eyes linger, and the way your appearance contributes to the atmosphere of luxury, indulgence, and perhaps even exoticism. This constant awareness of being physically judged, of being reduced to an object of beauty or desire, is profoundly dehumanizing, stripping away your inner self in favor of an outer facade. This emphasis on your physical presentation means that even your body, your most intimate and personal possession, is not truly yours to command or define. It is maintained, groomed, and presented for another's consumption and display. You might be required to bathe frequently, to oil your skin, to maintain a youthful, unblemished appearance. All tasks that reinforce your objectification and the idea that your primary value lies in your physical form. The fleeting beauty of youth, which for a free man might lead to honorable marriage and the establishment of a family, for you means continued servitude and vulnerability. The mirror reflects a carefully constructed image, a pleasing facade, but behind the eyes, there's a silent resignation, a deep weariness from the constant performance. The sounds of the symposium, once distant, now feel intensely close, the murmurs and laughter creating an oppressive atmosphere where your body is constantly on display, evaluated and consumed. This meticulous control over your appearance underscores the profound lack of control you have over any aspect of your life, from your inner thoughts to your very outward presentation. As you continue your silent life in the Athenian household, you become aware of an even more extreme and disturbing facet of male concubinage, the existence of the pure delicatus. While the term literally means delicate boy, it often referred to enslaved boys or young men who were specifically groomed from a very young age for sexual service and pleasure. These individuals represented the pinnacle of a patron's indulgent wealth and power, their very existence a stark testament to unchecked privilege and the commodification of human beings. It's a critical historical point that the younger the boy, the more desirable he sometimes was for this role, leading to even more profound exploitation. An interesting detail here is that unlike concubines, who might have been acquired as adolescents or young adults, a pure delicatus was often taken into the household as a mere child. They were separated from their families at an age when their personalities were still forming, ensuring their complete dependence and malleability. Historians still argue about the precise extent of these practices and how widespread they were, but the literary and artistic evidence points to their undeniable presence among the very wealthy elite. You might witness a younger boy in the household, perhaps even younger than yourself, moving with an even greater sense of fragility and obedience, a chilling premonition of what his future might hold. The innocence in his eyes slowly fading with each passing day would be a painful sight. Picture the psychological trauma inflicted upon such a child, raised entirely within the confines of their patron's desires. Their sense of self would be utterly warped. They wouldn't know a life free from constant scrutiny or the expectation of sexual service. Their education would be limited to pleasing their master, and their world would shrink to the boundaries of the household. They would be utterly robbed of a childhood, thrust into a premature adulthood defined by exploitation. The very concept of consent would be entirely alien to them, never having had the opportunity to develop personal boundaries or agency. Their laughter, if heard, might sound forced or strangely hollow, devoid of true childish joy. This systematic grooming from a tender age ensures a deeper, more insidious form of control. The pure delicatus would grow up knowing no other reality, making escape or resistance almost unthinkable. Their dependence, both economic and emotional, would be absolute. They might even develop a twisted form of attachment to their patron, a survival mechanism born of extreme vulnerability. The luxurious surroundings, meant to impress visitors, would for them be a constant reminder of their captivity, a golden cage that held their spirit prisoner. The sounds of the bustling city outside, full of the uninhibited cries of free children, would only serve to highlight the profound, irreversible loss of their own stolen youth and innocence, a silent tragedy unfolding within the seemingly idyllic walls of the villa. As you continue to observe the hidden lives within the wealthy Athenian household, a chilling and often disturbing practice comes into stark focus: castration. While not universal or always explicitly documented for every concubine, it was a known and horrifying reality for some, particularly those destined for long-term service as puri delicati or highly prized household servants. This irreversible physical alteration served multiple brutal purposes: to preserve a youthful, unblemished appearance, to ensure perpetual docility, and to eliminate the possibility of siring legitimate heirs who might complicate inheritance or challenge a patron's authority. It's a critical historical point that this practice was primarily about maintaining control and enhancing a specific, often sexual aesthetic, rather than for any medical reason. An interesting detail here is that eunuchs, or castrated males, held a complex and sometimes paradoxical position in ancient societies, including parts of Greece and more prominently in the Persian Empire, which influenced Greek practices. While they were physically mutilated, they could sometimes rise to positions of considerable power and trust within royal courts or wealthy households, precisely because they posed no threat to lineage and were seen as utterly loyal due to their complete dependence. However, for a concubine, castration was typically about maintaining their physical form and ensuring a perpetual submissive state. Historians still debate the prevalence of this practice, specifically for male concubines in Athens, but its very possibility casts a long, dark shadow over your existence, a terrifying extreme of patriarchal control. You might encounter an older eunuch in the household, perhaps a trusted servant whose smooth, youthful features betray the painful history of his past, a silent warning of what depths of control were possible. Picture the sheer horror of such an ordeal. To have your body, your very essence of masculinity, irrevocably altered, not by choice, but by force. The physical pain would be immense, but the psychological and emotional trauma would be infinitely deeper. You would be stripped not only of your capacity for fatherhood, but also, in the eyes of society, of your full manhood, forever marked as other. This act of mutilation would serve as the ultimate expression of your patron's absolute power, a complete and total subjugation that leaves an indelible mark, both visible and invisible. Your identity would be fundamentally reshaped by this violation. This practice underscores the terrifying vulnerability of those in your position, highlighting the absolute lack of bodily autonomy. Your body is not simply used for gratification. It can be fundamentally reshaped to better serve the desires and anxieties of your patron. It is the ultimate act of commodification, reducing a human being to a manipulated object. The cool marble floors beneath your bare feet, usually solid and comforting, might suddenly feel cold and menacing, echoing the chill of this grim possibility. The sounds of daily life, the distant hum of the city, become muted, replaced by the terrifying whisper of fear. A constant awareness of the extreme lengths to which power could be asserted. This ultimate violation of the self, to be physically unmade for another's purpose, represents the absolute nadir of human dignity within this ancient system. Beyond the confines of Athens, your understanding of concubinage expands, revealing the surprising diversity of ancient Greek city-states. While your Athenian experience has been one of subtle confinement and social invisibility, other regions held different, sometimes radically contrasting views. It's a fascinating historical point that Spartan society, renowned for its militaristic discipline, approached male relationships with a pragmatism that might surprise you. Here, same-sex bonds, particularly between older warriors and younger boys, were not only tolerated, but actively encouraged, believed to foster camaraderie and martial prowess within the ranks. This was a direct contrast to the more nuanced and often condemnatory views found in other city-states like Athens. You might find yourself pondering the irony of a society known for its rigid discipline also being more open about certain aspects of sexuality than its more enlightened neighbors. An interesting detail is that in Sparta, these relationships were often seen as a form of rigorous mentorship, where the elder Erastes guided the younger Eromenos in physical training, military tactics, and the strict codes of Spartan citizenship. The sexual aspect, while present, was often framed within this pedagogical context, a means to an end for building fierce, loyal soldiers. There was a strong emphasis on the agoge, the rigorous Spartan upbringing, and these relationships were integrated into that system, Historians still argue whether the Spartan emphasis on the collective good and military strength truly transcended individual desires, genuinely sublimating them into a higher purpose. Or if the idealization of these bonds simply served as a convenient justification to reinforce their unique societal structure and control over the populace. You might imagine the stark contrast in Sparta. Your youthful beauty might have been a means to military excellence and civic contribution, not just private pleasure or a display of wealth. Now contrast this with your Athenian reality, where, as you've experienced, the laws were quite different. You might recall the stricter Athenian laws, particularly those enacted to curb certain homosexual acts, especially sodomy, which was sometimes perceived as unnatural or taboo, especially if the free citizen took the passive role. These legal distinctions created a precarious existence for you. Unlike the more open, if still formalized and purposeful relationships in Sparta, you'd feel the constant anxiety of living under such laws, where certain acts, if performed with a free citizen outside the specific hidden bounds of your role as a concubine, could lead to severe penalties, even public shaming or loss of rights for the free person involved. This dual standard, where the patron might escape censure, but the concubine was always vulnerable, was a cruel reality. This divergence between city-states highlights the fragmented nature of ancient Greece. There wasn't one unified Greek way of life, but a mosaic of customs, laws, and philosophies, often fiercely independent and sometimes contradictory. For someone in your position, this meant that merely crossing a border could shift the very definition of your existence. In Athens, you were largely hidden, a discrete part of a wealthy man's private life, existing in a gray area of social and legal ambiguity. In Sparta, a similar bond, albeit with different societal emphasis and purpose, might have been a public, if disciplined, part of life, woven into the very fabric of their military and educational system. You might even hear whispers of other regions, like Thebes, where the sacred band, an elite military unit composed of pairs of male lovers, was revered for its unmatched bravery and cohesion, suggesting yet another interpretation of male bonds. The quiet hum of the Athenian city, filled with its own specific rules and judgments, underscores the narrow confines of your particular reality. You are constantly reminded that your existence is contingent on these specific local customs and legal interpretations. The freedom to simply be yourself, or even to express genuine affection, is tightly bound by these invisible lines drawn on the ancient map. The gentle breeze carries the scent of pine in distant sea, but it does little to dispel the heavy atmosphere of a life lived under the shadow of societal and legal constraints unique to your immediate surroundings. The serene backdrop of ancient Greece, with its marble temples and philosophical debates, often masks a grim underlying truth for individuals like yourself. Sexual assault and forced intercourse were pervasive realities carried out with chilling impunity by those in power. It's a stark historical fact that while ancient Greek law could be severe for offenses against free citizens, particularly regarding their bodies and their honor, these protections simply did not extend to you, the male concubine. You existed in a legal blind spot, a shadowy zone where your consent was deemed utterly irrelevant and your body was considered a consumable commodity. This was not merely an oversight in their legal code. It was a deeply ingrained aspect of the power structures that governed your existence. An interesting detail you might find particularly unsettling is the chilling double standard that existed. If a free citizen, especially a male citizen, were to be sexually assaulted or forced, it was considered a grave offense against their time, their honor, and their civic standing, often punishable by harsh fines, public shaming, or even death. as it represented a profound violation of their personal autonomy and status. Yet, for a concubine, such acts by a patron or his privileged guests were largely outside the purview of the law. You were considered to be in a state of perpetual minority or non-personhood in this specific context. Historians still argue whether this legal vacuum was a deliberate mechanism to maintain the absolute power of the elite, allowing them unfettered access to those beneath them in the social hierarchy, or simply a reflection of a society that did not recognize your personhood in a way that warranted the same protective legal framework afforded to its citizens. You feel the cold dread of this reality, a constant, sickening awareness that your body is not your own and its use is dictated entirely by another's desire. Picture the countless nights of fear and humiliation. You might be summoned to your patron's chambers, or even be exposed to his friends during a symposium, compelled to participate in acts that fill you with revulsion. There is no escape, no refusal that would not bring even harsher consequences. Your forced compliance is not just expected, it is demanded. A silent duty that is part of the unspoken contract of your existence. Any physical or emotional resistance would likely be met with further violence, or at the very least, severe punishment that could range from public humiliation to outright physical harm, potentially even death. You learn to dissociate, to retreat into your mind, creating a mental fortress against the indignities your body endures, hoping to somehow detach your spirit from the physical pain. The whispers of the wind through the olive trees outside offer no comfort, only a soft, indifferent sigh, as if the very air itself is complicit in your suffering. This absolute lack of accountability for your abusers creates a profound and inescapable sense of helplessness. There is no one to tell, no authority to appeal to. The very society that built grand monuments to justice and reason, that celebrated the rule of law and the sanctity of the polis, turns a blind eye to your plight. You are cattle, a tool for gratification, and your suffering is simply part of the unspoken cost of existing in such a vulnerable position within their social architecture. The grand pronouncements of virtue and liberty, made by philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, often heard echoing through the intellectual circles of Athens, seem like hollow, mocking echoes in the face of your personal reality. You carry the burden of these violations not just on your body, but deep within your spirit, a hidden wound that never truly heals, poisoning your perception of yourself and the world around you. The soft flicker of the oil lamp in your room seems to highlight the pervasive darkness that envelops your life, a reflection of your own inner turmoil and the despair that often creeps in during the quiet hours of the night. Despite the bleakness of your situation, you begin to observe the curious fluidity of status that could exist even for those in your vulnerable position. While your overall social standing was undeniably low, your individual experience was profoundly shaped by the wealth and social standing of your patron. It's a key historical insight that life for an enslaved person or a concubine was not a monolithic experience. A powerful, affluent patron could at times offer a surprising degree of material comfort and relative safety compared to a poorer, less influential one. This disparity meant that while the fundamental lack of freedom remained, the quality of your daily life could swing wildly based on the resources and temperament of the man who owned you. An interesting detail here is that a particularly wealthy or well-regarded patron, an Erastes of considerable means and social influence, might provide you with more than just basic sustenance. You might receive better clothing made of finer fabrics, more palatable and diverse food, and perhaps even a private room, a small, quiet space that offered a modicum of privacy within the sprawling household. This private space, however small, could be an invaluable refuge from the constant scrutiny of other household members. Your physical safety, too, could be somewhat enhanced simply because your patron's reputation and influence might deter others from overt mistreatment or interference with his property. Historians still argue whether these occasional creature comforts were genuine acts of benevolence, a subtle form of possessiveness over a valuable asset, or simply a reflection of the patron's overall lavish lifestyle extending to all his possessions, including human ones. You feel the subtle difference. While still unfree, the quality of your captivity can vary greatly, a stark contrast to the dire circumstances of those under less affluent masters. Picture being in the household of a truly prominent Athenian, perhaps a statesman, a celebrated general, or a renowned philosopher with extensive landholdings. The villa itself would be a testament to his power. Walls adorned with exquisite frescoes depicting myths or heroic deeds, the gardens lush and meticulously kept, filled with fragrant herbs and blooming flowers, and the food served at symposia would be the finest available. Brought from distant lands, in such an environment, you might be dressed in finer tunics, perhaps even allowed to wear a modest piece of jewelry, a subtle badge of your patron's wealth rather than your own dignity. Your days might be less physically arduous, filled more with attending to your patron's intellectual or personal needs, fetching scrolls, preparing his bath, acting as a personal attendant rather than heavy manual labor. You might even travel with him on his political or commercial journeys, seeing parts of the Greek world, like distant colonies or other city-states, that others in your position could only dream of. However, this comparative comfort is a gilded cage. Remember, it doesn't equate to freedom or dignity. The financial security you experience is entirely contingent on your patron's continued favor and prosperity. If his fortunes turn due to political upheaval or business failures, or if he simply grew tired of you and acquired a younger, more appealing concubine, that comfortable existence could vanish in an instant, leaving you utterly destitute and vulnerable. The quiet clinking of the water in the central fountain of the peristyle, usually a calming sound, now underscores the precariousness of your situation. You are keenly aware that your ease is merely a reflection of your patron's wealth, not an earned privilege or a sign of your own improved status, and it can be withdrawn as swiftly and arbitrarily as it was granted. This profound dependence means even comparative luxury comes with its own pervasive anxiety, a constant underlying fear of sudden loss and abandonment. Amidst the pervasive system of concubinage and the terrifying realities it entailed, you might surprisingly catch whispers of early attempts at legal regulation, though these were often limited and crucially not designed for your protection. Instead, these laws were primarily concerned with the preservation of citizen honor, the prevention of aristocratic scandal, and the proper maintenance of the social order, not the rights or well-being of the concubine. It's a key historical point that any legal discussions around male sexual relationships primarily focused on the active and passive roles taken by free citizens and the potential for disgrace if a free man took a traditionally submissive role. An interesting detail here is that Athenian law, for example, had provisions that could punish a free citizen who willingly submitted to sexual penetration by another free man, particularly if it implied an effeminate nature or a lack of self-control, which was seen as unbecoming of a citizen. Such an act could lead to atimia, a loss of civic rights, including the right to speak in the assembly or hold public office. However, these laws did not protect you, the concubine. In fact, your very existence as someone who by definition, occupied the passive role, was often implicitly acknowledged as outside the realm of honorable citizenship. Historians still argue whether these laws against effeminate behavior inadvertently pushed such practices further into the shadows, making the position of individuals like you even more vulnerable and less likely to be publicly acknowledged or regulated in a way that offered any safeguards. You feel the sharp irony. The laws protect those who exploit, not those who are exploited. Picture overhearing a discussion among your patron's guests about a recent legal case where a prominent citizen lost his rights for allegedly prostituting himself or taking a dishonorable sexual role. The discussions would be heated, focusing on the preservation of time, honor, and the integrity of the citizen body. You, pouring their wine, would be a silent witness to their outrage, knowing that their indignation stems not from concern for the exploited individual, but for the perceived stain on the purity of their own ranks. Your own constant subjugation, the daily indignities you face, are entirely irrelevant to their concept of justice or moral order. These early regulations, therefore, offered no real hope for your betterment or freedom. They served to reinforce the existing power structures, clarifying who held power and whose bodies were considered valuable enough to be protected by law. They created a distinction between honorable and dishonorable sexual acts, but the criteria for this honor were always based on the status of the free male citizen. Your body, your role, and your experiences simply fell into the dishonorable category by default, without any consideration for your will or circumstances. The distant sounds of the Athenian assembly, where citizens debated laws that shaped their world, would be a constant reminder of the legal universe from which you were fundamentally excluded, a silent, voiceless entity caught in a web of rules not designed for your benefit, but for your subjugation. As your days unfold, the subtle yet pervasive burden of social humiliation becomes a constant companion. Unlike the overt shaming inflicted upon condemned criminals or publicly disgraced citizens, your humiliation is often unspoken, implied, and deeply internalized. It's a crucial historical point that while male concubinage was tolerated and practiced among the elite, it was never a path to social respectability or public recognition. Instead, it marked you subtly but indelibly as someone outside the honorable societal norms. An interesting detail here is how this humiliation was often communicated through nonverbal cues. The averted gaze of a respectable citizen, the slight tightening of a matron's lips as she passes you, the dismissive tone used by household servants who, though also unfree, might perceive themselves as having a higher social standing due to their defined, non-sexual roles. Historians still argue whether this pervasive internalized shame was more psychologically damaging than outright physical abuse. For some, slowly eroding the victim's sense of self-worth and identity. You feel this constant, subtle pressure, a quiet yet relentless reminder of your diminished status. Picture attending to your patron during a public procession or a visit to the agora. You move a step behind him, your eyes cast down, your demeanor carefully subdued. You know that while your patron's presence commands respect, your own presence by his side in this particular role could invite whispers, knowing glances, or even silent judgment from others. You are a walking symbol of a private arrangement that, while common, was still considered outside the boundaries of dignified public life for free men. The very air around you seems to hum with this unspoken judgment, a collective societal disapproval that you are forced to absorb. This constant public and private dishonor creates a deep psychological wound. You learn to internalize the message that you are less than, that your worth is fundamentally tied to your utility, and not to any inherent human dignity. The pride you might have once felt as a free boy, or the simple joy of unburdened existence, is slowly, painstakingly stripped away. You become a master of self-effacement, of making yourself invisible to avoid drawing attention to the very thing that brings you shame. The laughter of free children playing in the distance, their innocence unburdened by such societal strictures, seems a poignant contrast to your own heavy heart. This pervasive sense of humiliation becomes an ingrained part of your identity, a silent burden, carried with every breath. The heavy weight of your reality, you now understand, is also defined by the almost insurmountable difficulties of escape. For a male concubine in ancient Greece, breaking free from your patron's control was a monumental, often impossible task. You are not simply confined by physical walls. You are trapped by a complex web of legal, economic, and social barriers that are nearly impenetrable. It's a crucial historical point that unlike some forms of slavery, where manumission, the act of being freed, was a recognized, though often rare, possibility, the path to freedom for a male concubine was far less defined and fraught with extreme peril. An interesting detail here is that even if a male concubine managed to slip away from his patron's household, he would immediately face a myriad of challenges that made long-term freedom almost unsustainable. Without a family network to return to, as many were sold from distant regions or had their families disavow them, without economic means, and without any recognized legal status, you would be a stateless, rootless individual. You would be vulnerable to being recaptured by your original patron, who legally owned you if you were a slave, or simply taken by another, more unscrupulous individual. Historians still argue whether the absence of clear legal pathways to freedom was a deliberate design to ensure total control, or simply a reflection of a society that couldn't conceive of a positive role for such individuals outside of their servitude. You feel the crushing despair of this reality, knowing that every path leads to another form of bondage. Picture the fleeting thought of rebellion or escape that might occasionally flicker in your mind. You envision yourself slipping out under the cover of night, perhaps stealing a few coins, and trying to disappear into the anonymity of the Athenian countryside or a distant port city. But then the cold logic of your situation sets in. Where would you go? Who would shelter you? Without money, you would starve. Without connections, you would be an easy target for bandits, or worse, captured and sold into even harsher servitude, perhaps in the mines or as a common laborer, where life expectancy was brutally short. The fear of recapture and the severe punishment that would inevitably follow acts as a powerful deterrent, binding you more effectively than any chain. This almost complete lack of viable escape routes means you are forced into a position of resigned acceptance. Your life is not your own to shape or choose. The very notion of self-determination, so celebrated among the free citizens of Athens, is a cruel joke for you. You learn to suppress any longing for liberty, to extinguish the embers of hope, because nurturing them only leads to deeper pain. The sounds of distant travelers on the road, their laughter echoing in the night, are a poignant reminder of the expansive world beyond your reach, a world that offers no refuge for someone like you. Your dreams of freedom are just that, dreams fading into the cold, stark reality of your perpetual confinement. The cumulative weight of your experiences, the constant subjugation, the lack of rights, and the pervasive social stigma begins to manifest as a deep, insidious, internalized shame. It's a psychological burden far heavier than any physical task, a silent poison that slowly erodes your sense of self-worth and identity. You begin to see yourself through the eyes of your oppressors and the disapproving society around you. internalizing the belief that your existence is inherently dishonorable and that you are less than a complete human being. This is a critical historical point, as the psychological impacts of such widespread, sanctioned exploitation are often overlooked in historical accounts. An interesting detail here is how this internalized shame can lead to a kind of self-policing. You might unconsciously adopt the very behaviors and attitudes that society expects of you as a concubine, believing them to be your true nature. You might become overly deferential, avoid eye contact, speak softly, and suppress any spontaneous displays of emotion or opinion, not just out of fear of punishment, but because you genuinely believe such expressions are not allowed for someone like you. Historians still argue whether this internalization was a survival mechanism that protected the individual from further pain by dulling their self-perception, or if it was the ultimate victory of the oppressive system, making the victim complicit in their own dehumanization. You feel this subtle shift within yourself, a gradual extinguishing of your own vibrant spirit. Picture catching your reflection in a polished bronze mirror or a still pool of water. Instead of seeing a person with hopes, dreams, and a unique personality, you might begin to see what your patron sees: a beautiful object, a compliant servant, a vessel for another's desires. The youthful features that once held promise now seem to be merely tools of your captivity. The very idea of personal agency, of having desires that are truly your own and worthy of pursuit, becomes a distant, almost forgotten memory. You might even find yourself agreeing with the societal judgment, believing that your current state is somehow a natural or deserved consequence of your past or your birth. This constant internal battle, this struggle against a self-perception imposed by others, is profoundly isolating. You cannot share this inner turmoil with anyone for fear of appearing ungrateful, rebellious, or simply mad. So you carry this shame alone, a silent companion that whispers insidious doubts into your mind, day and night. The warmth of the sun on your skin, the beauty of the Athenian landscape, the simple pleasures of life, all seem muted and dulled by this pervasive sense of unworthiness. You become a ghost in your own life, existing physically but diminishing internally, a profound and tragic consequence of your position. This internalized shame cements your captivity not just within the villa, but within the very confines of your own mind. As the centuries passed and the glory of ancient Greece began to wane, new philosophical and religious currents emerged that would profoundly impact the social landscape, including, albeit slowly, the practice of concubinage. The most significant of these was the rise of Christianity. While it would take centuries for its influence to fully permeate society, the core tenets of early Christian thought, with their emphasis on spiritual equality, the sanctity of individual life, and a more restrictive view of sexual morality, began to chip away at the long-standing pagan practices that had normalized concubinage. It's a crucial historical turning point that these new moral frameworks, even if initially applied imperfectly, challenged the very foundations of practices like yours. An interesting detail here is that early Christian teachings, while advocating for a stricter sexual ethic overall, often condemned all non-marital sexual relationships, including those involving concubines, whether male or female. This was a radical departure from the more fluid and often permissive sexual mores of pagan Greece and Rome. While not immediately leading to widespread abolition, these condemnations gradually shifted public opinion and legal frameworks, pushing practices like male concubinage further into the realm of the illicit and sinful. Historians still argue whether the Christian emphasis on the spiritual rather than the physical, and the notion of a universal moral law genuinely improved the lot of the exploited, or simply replaced one form of subjugation with another, albeit with different justifications. You might imagine the faint whispers of this new faith, initially dismissed as strange, slowly growing into a roar that would reshape the world around you. Picture a future where the grand temples of Zeus and Athena, so central to Athenian life, begin to stand empty, their statues draped or removed, replaced by smaller, simpler Christian churches. You might hear missionaries speaking of a God who sees all souls as equal in his eyes, regardless of social status or origin. This concept, so utterly alien to the hierarchical society you inhabit, would be revolutionary, almost unfathomable. While this nascent Christianity would have its own forms of intolerance and social control, its condemnation of practices rooted in sexual exploitation, particularly of the vulnerable, would eventually erode the social acceptance that had allowed concubinage to flourish. This new moral compass, however slowly, began to dismantle the ideological underpinnings that had justified your existence. The idea that all individuals possessed an inherent spiritual worth, even those considered property or objects of desire, was a powerful, if often hypocritical challenge to the ancient order. The very ground beneath the feet of your patrons would begin to subtly shift as the foundations of their unquestioned dominance were questioned by a burgeoning moral authority. The sounds of pagan festivals, once vibrant and all-encompassing, would gradually be replaced by the quiet chanting of Christian hymns, signaling a new era with different, though perhaps not immediately kinder, rules. Your fate, though still precarious, would become entwined with these sweeping societal transformations, hinting at a distant future where such practices might eventually become obsolete. The inexorable march of time, coupled with the profound cultural and religious shifts ushered in by Christianity, ultimately led to the decline of male concubinage in the ancient world. This wasn't an overnight revolution, but a slow, gradual process spanning centuries. As new legal codes, moral frameworks, and social sensibilities took root, the practices that had defined your existence, once openly tolerated or implicitly accepted, slowly faded into disrepute, eventually becoming condemned and, in many regions, outlawed. It's a crucial historical development that reflects a significant transformation in Western societal views on sexuality, individual rights, and the treatment of vulnerable populations. An interesting detail here is that the decline wasn't solely due to Christian morality. Economic changes also played a role. As the Roman Empire, which had absorbed Greece, began to face internal strife and external pressures, the large, slave-based households that facilitated practices like concubinage became less common. The shift towards more localized agrarian economies and, later, feudal systems altered the dynamics of household labor and personal relationships. Moreover, evolving ideas about family, inheritance, and the role of the individual within society contributed to the slow erosion of practices that had once been commonplace. Historians still debate which factor, religious, economic, or social, played the most dominant role in the eventual demise of formalized male concubinage. You might imagine the world around you subtly but surely changing. A slow creaking of the old order giving way to something new, if not always entirely better. Picture a future where the notion of a man keeping another man as a concubine would be met not with quiet acceptance, but with widespread condemnation, even legal prosecution. The very idea that a free person could be forced into such a role would become unthinkable, a barbaric relic of a bygone era. The language itself would shift. Terms like catamite would become historical curiosities, imbued with a sense of past injustice rather than current reality. The grand villas that once housed such arrangements would either fall into ruin or be repurposed, their walls no longer echoing the silent suffering of those within. This slow but undeniable societal evolution offers a bittersweet perspective, while you, in your historical reality, might never experience this freedom. The knowledge that such practices would eventually be relegated to the dustbin of history provides a flicker of posthumous vindication. The relentless pressures of emerging moralities and changing social structures would eventually render your particular form of servitude obsolete. The distant sounds of the changing world, perhaps the tolling of a church bell replacing the old temple drums, signify not just a new religion, but a different kind of human society beginning to take shape. One that, however imperfectly, would eventually strive for different ideals regarding human dignity and autonomy. Your suffering, though real and profound, would become a testament to a time that ultimately, and thankfully, passed. As the centuries truly roll on and the dust of ancient Greece settles into the annals of history, you gain the ability to look back and reflect on the lasting legacy of male concubinage. It is a legacy marked by pain, exploitation, and the profound dehumanization of individuals, a stark counterpoint to the celebrated intellectual and artistic achievements of the era. This practice left deep, invisible scars on the individuals caught within its grasp, scars that resonated through generations even as the specific practice faded into obscurity. It's a crucial historical understanding that, while societies evolve, the human cost of their institutions, particularly those that deny fundamental rights, remains a powerful and enduring lesson. An interesting detail here is how the historical silence surrounding male concubinage contributed to its lasting impact, because it was often unacknowledged in formal, legal, or philosophical texts. Its reality was left largely to be inferred from indirect evidence, pottery, fragmented poems, and legal speeches that hinted at its existence without explicitly detailing the lives of those involved. This lack of explicit historical record means that the voices of those who suffered are largely unheard, their experiences relegated to the realm of conjecture rather than direct testimony. Historians continue to piece together this painful past, attempting to give voice to the voiceless. You might feel a sense of profound injustice, knowing that your story, and the stories of countless others like you, have been largely erased from the celebrated narrative of this powerful civilization. Picture trying to explain your life to someone from a truly free future. How would you convey the subtle terror of economic dependence, the chilling impunity of abuse, the soul-crushing weight of social stigma? The very concepts of consent and bodily autonomy, so fundamental to modern understanding of human rights, were simply not applied to you. Your existence was defined by their absence. The beauty of the temples, the profundity of the philosophies, the democratic ideals, all these achievements would seem tainted, shadowed by the systemic exploitation that underpinned so much of the society. You would highlight the paradox. A civilization that prized freedom and reason, yet simultaneously sanctioned profound unfreedom and irrational cruelty towards segments of its own population. This reflection offers a unique, albeit painful, perspective on human history. It teaches us about the complexities of power, the fragility of rights, and the enduring human capacity for both cruelty and resilience. The lingering shadows of male concubinage serve as a stark reminder that progress is rarely linear, and that even in seemingly enlightened societies, profound injustices can flourish when unchecked power and social prejudice combine. Your final thought might be a quiet hope that by unearthing and understanding these difficult truths, future generations can better recognize the subtle forms of exploitation that might still exist in their own times, ensuring that such indignities are never again normalized. The wind whispers through the ancient ruins, carrying with it the echoes of untold stories, urging remembrance and vigilance. As the final grains of sand fall through the hourglass of ancient Greek history, you are left with a profound and somber reflection on your journey. You have walked in the silent footsteps of a male concubine, experiencing a life defined by profound vulnerability, relentless exploitation, and a constant struggle against a society that denied your basic humanity. This wasn't a romanticized tale of ancient passion, but a stark, often brutal reality of power imbalances and systemic dehumanization. Your journey through this historical reality has illuminated the stark contrast between the lofty ideals often celebrated in ancient Greece, democracy, philosophy, art, and the grim lived experiences of those who existed at its very margins. An interesting detail that lingers in your mind is how the very subtlety of this form of exploitation made it particularly insidious. It wasn't always the overt brutality of the mines or the physical chains of a galley slave. Instead, it was the pervasive lack of autonomy, the constant emotional invalidation, the quiet stripping away of dignity, and the ever-present threat of abuse without recourse. This psychological warfare, the constant erosion of self, perhaps left wounds more profound than physical scars. Historians continue to grapple with the complexities of this hidden history, trying to understand not just what happened, but how a society could justify such practices while simultaneously aspiring to such heights of intellectual and civic achievement. You are left with the chilling understanding of how easily human dignity can be compromised when power is unchecked and certain lives are deemed less valuable. Picture the quiet resilience required to endure such a life, day after day. The small internal victories, a moment of peace, a fleeting thought of defiance, the ability to maintain a hidden core of self amid the overwhelming pressure to conform. These were not grand acts of rebellion, but vital strategies for psychological survival. You might ponder the inherent strength of the human spirit even when subjected to the most crushing circumstances. Despite the systematic attempts to erase identity, to reduce personhood to mere utility, something within always remained, a quiet flicker of self that no amount of oppression could fully extinguish. This resilience, though born of necessity rather than choice, speaks to something fundamental about human nature. Even in the darkest corners of history, even when society itself conspired to deny humanity to certain individuals, the core of what makes us human somehow endured. The whispers of the wind through the ancient olive groves, the distant murmur of the Aegean Sea, now seem to carry not just the sounds of a lost world, but the echoes of countless unspoken stories, each a testament to endurance. These sounds, unchanged across millennia, bore witness to suffering that went unrecorded, to lives that left no monuments, to voices that were systematically silenced. Yet in excavating this hidden history, in giving language to these experiences, we perform an act of restoration. We acknowledge what was denied, that these individuals mattered, that their suffering was real, that their humanity was never truly erased, despite every effort to do so. Your final thoughts are not of bitterness, but of a quiet, enduring lesson. The legacy of male concubinage in ancient Greece serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of recognizing and safeguarding the rights of all individuals, regardless of their social standing, gender, or perceived utility. It teaches us that civilizations we admire, societies we study and celebrate, were built on foundations that included profound injustice. The philosophers who pondered the nature of justice did so in households where injustice was practiced daily. The democratic assemblies that debated freedom, excluded vast numbers from any meaningful liberty. It underscores the danger of unchecked power and the insidious nature of systems that deny agency and personhood. Power without accountability, privilege without responsibility, social structures that benefit some by exploiting others. These are not merely ancient problems. They are perennial human challenges that manifest in different forms across time and culture. The male concubine's experience teaches us to look beyond the celebrated narratives, to ask who remains invisible in our own societies, whose voices are marginalized, whose humanity is quietly denied. The beauty of ancient Greece is undeniable, but so too is its shadow side. We cannot fully appreciate the light without acknowledging the darkness. The marble temples and philosophical treatises, the athletic competitions and theatrical performances, all of these existed alongside practices that we now recognize as profound violations of human dignity. This duality is perhaps the most important lesson. Greatness and cruelty, wisdom and exploitation, beauty and brutality, they can and often do coexist. Acknowledging this does not diminish the achievements. Rather, it deepens our understanding of what human societies are capable of, both magnificent and monstrous. By confronting these difficult truths, we gain a deeper, more nuanced understanding of humanity's past, and perhaps a greater resolve to build a future where such systemic exploitation becomes truly impossible. We learn that progress is not inevitable, that rights once denied do not automatically become recognized, that change requires conscious effort, sustained vigilance, and the courage to name injustice even when it is woven into the fabric of respected institutions. The story of the male concubine reminds us that every society has its blind spots, its accepted cruelties, its normalized exploitations. What seems natural and inevitable in one era can become unthinkable in another. This should give us both humility about our own time and hope for the future. If such entrenched practices could eventually be dismantled, what injustices of our own era might future generations look back upon with similar horror? The sun sets on this ancient world, leaving behind a profound stillness and a silent plea for remembrance and vigilance. In that stillness, we might hear not just the past speaking to us, but also a question directed at our present. What invisible suffering exists in our own societies? Whose humanity are we failing to recognize? What systems do we participate in without questioning? The male concubines of ancient Greece can no longer speak for themselves, but their story, painstakingly reconstructed from fragments and silences, speaks to us still. It reminds us that human dignity is not granted by society, but is inherent, and that our measure as a civilization lies not in how we treat those with power, but in how we honor the humanity of those without it. As the last light fades from the ruins of Sarmizegetusa, from the agora of Athens, from all the places where such lives unfolded in quiet desperation, we carry forward a responsibility to remember what was, to recognize what is, and to build what should be a world that truly sees the humanity in every individual, regardless of their position, their utility, or their power.